Hello, and welcome to Nonprofit Challenges, a monthly series on the Manhattan Neighborhood Network. My name is Alice Yeager, and I'll be your host, and bring together your colleagues who work in nonprofits to focus on the challenges we all face and the solutions we've explored. Each show will begin with a situation you've no doubt encountered and will be followed by a discussion with our invited guests. Our goal is to help you know you're not alone with these issues and to learn how your colleagues have approached them. We'll also provide resources on our website that you can access for more information and insight. We want to give you an opportunity to be heard, and so we've created a Gmail address, nonprofitchallenges@gmail.com. Please feel free to communicate with us with challenges you want addressed and comments about what you've already seen and heard on the show. We also have a website, which is nonprofitchallengescable.com, where you can find resources and information. Our first two shows focus on a critical issue for all of us. How can an organization develop a culture that supports fundraising success? The first show we did brought together an executive director and associate development director to provide their perspectives. In this show, we'll discuss fundraising with two members of the board of directors of their respective organizations. Here's the situation for today. A new development director has been hired by the Alphabet Bates organization, and he's interested in meeting with the chair of the board or chair of the fundraising committee as soon as possible. The executive director fills him in on the board's fundraising and fund development activities, which it turns out are minimal. The development director needs to address these concerns. With that, let me introduce our guests. Allison Kellogg, who is the board chair of the Pearl Theater Company, and Michael Melcher, who is a member of the board of Comprehensive Development, Inc. Welcome.
Thank you.
So before we begin our conversation, would you each say a little bit about your respective organizations? Allison, why don't you start?
Sure, happy to. The Pearl is a classical theater company, and our productions range from playwrights from ancient Greece through the mid-20th century. We have a stellar resident acting company, which is critical when you're doing classical theater. You need classically trained actors and actresses. And we also have a number of educational programs to enrich theater growers' experience from adults through classics in the classroom, which we do with high school students. Next year, we are celebrating our 30th anniversary.
Wow.
And with a season that starts with You Never Can Tell by George Bernard Shaw, then a play that Terrence McNally has written for the Pearl, and Away We Go, that's about a theater troupe, No Exit by Jean-Paul Sartre, and then The Rivals by Sheridan. So that's pretty representative of the type of theater that we do.
It's excellent theater. I've been to the Pearl many, many times.
I am glad
and you
to
have
hear that.
Just a fantastic repertoire of
and a
shows
beautiful
and
new home on West 42nd Street.
So that I haven't seen yet.
You need to come and see
I will. I will. Thank you, Allison. Mm-hmm. Michael, tell us about CDI.
CDI is a companion organization to three public schools in New York City, three public high schools. The schools are Manhattan Comprehensive Day and Night School, the High School for Health Professions, and Cydia School. And two out of the three schools are what are called transfer schools. So they're taking students who are somewhere between 18 and 21 usually, who'd often had interruptions in their high school experience. And CDI focuses on giving the students the support in order to get through that experience. So it might be tutoring, legal support, other types of interventions. It's basically an accelerated track toward getting a high school diploma before they age out at age 21.
That's great. Actually, when I worked at SHARE, which is a breast and ovarian cancer organization, we had a number of interns from Cydia schools, and they were just terrific youngsters. Yeah. So that's great. Okay, so let me start with this. A new study called Underdeveloped. It was recently published, and what it did was it surveyed maybe 2,700 executive directors and development directors and held focus groups to talk about the challenges that nonprofits face. Interestingly, they did not survey any board members. So maybe as a result of this show, they'll decide that they need to do a supplemental study. The study described the fundraising challenges, and it highlighted, one of the highlights was the role of the board in fund development and fundraising. And so I want to start off with something that the report said, which was that 75% of CEOs, chief executive officers, or executive directors say that boards don't do enough to raise funds for the organization. So has this been your experience? And what do you think might be, whether it might be so and why? So Allison, why don't we start with you?
It has not been my experience in the boards that I've been on. Fundraising has been one of the primary activities of the board. But what I have seen are a number of disconnects between the board and the staff, which might explain some of their findings. One, and the biggest, is that the board needs to be part of a comprehensive strategy and plan for fundraising with clear action steps and roles, and needs help in understanding where they fit into development and fundraising. And they also need support from the staff. And that's where I've seen disconnects.
So how does that happen? How does that get developed? How does the process of bringing board and staff together to develop such a fundraising plan, and a plan that incorporates what roles each of those members play, staff, board, maybe even others?
I think it's the collaboration between the board and the staff. I do think it's the board's responsibility to push the staff to have a fundraising strategy. A lot of organizations don't. It's what I call ready, fire, aim. And very rarely in life are you going to be effective at anything if it's ready, fire, aim. You need ready, aim, fire. And as you lay out the strategy, targeting where your funding is going to come from, who knows whom at these organizations, who do your board members know, what are their talents, what are their contacts, they fit into the plan. Mm-hmm. But the organization needs the plan to be effective.
Michael?
I can't address what the data source was for the study, but it's an interesting issue because the way I would recast it is that there is a gap between what the board is doing regarding fundraising and what they could do in fundraising. I think that New York boards, particularly in Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens, so forth, tend to have pretty established capacities. New York City has a really robust nonprofit sector. There are a lot of cross connections. We all know other people on boards. It's very easy to get data back and forth there. But what I do find is that a lot of people get on boards without being entirely sure what they're supposed to be doing. It's an important but a very vaguely defined type of role. And when it comes to fundraising, I think that oftentimes board members may not have a really clear idea of what their role is. They may feel that they don't have the skills that are required, and they may not know where they plug into the plan. So I think that one output of this collaboration that Allison's talking about is to help demystify what fundraising really is, where board members can be effective, what type of additional training or support they might need, and also what types of things are not really in the ambit of what board members should be doing.
So, I think that that's really critical. So let's kind of parse this out a little bit. So, roles and responsibilities of board members. How do you communicate to either a potential board member or to somebody who's been on the board for many years, what really their roles and responsibilities are? Because often that does not get communicated, in my experience. People come to board meetings or they don't, and they don't really know what their role is in particular, and they certainly don't necessarily know what their role is in fundraising. Well, so how would you do that?
Well, role clarity in any kind of job or volunteer endeavor is really important, and so the existing executive director and board members should take some time to figure out what is their understanding of what the board duties are, because it may vary from organization to organization. I tend to think of it as having three different areas. One is fiduciary responsibilities. That's being the long-term guidance for the board, making sure that it really is, the organization is hewing to its mission, however that's defined. A second is I would say, supporting the organization through different types of expertise, connections, and what have you. That's going to be very person by person, but oftentimes a board is a collection of individuals that may have insights to offer appropriately within their role. And then finally is financial support, which can have both a giving and a getting component. So the amount that you give yourself and then the amount that you assume responsibility for raising. So each of those might have a different definition depending on the organization, and you have to figure out what is really meaningful for the character of your particular organization and its needs. And then you have to figure out what are the behaviors that are consistent with that. So there are boards where they need board members to show up for every meeting, every committee meeting, and so forth. And there are others where they have a different idea of what the contributions of the board members might be.
And how do you figure that out? And who figures that out? Is it the executive director and the board chair who figure that out? Who decides what the nature of the board's roles should be and responsibilities should be? And I don't want us to veer too much away from fund development and fundraising. But really, this is, you're right. This is an essential question of determining roles.
Well, first of all, there are some secondary sources for this information. There are a number of booklets or guides on what it means to be a board. And so if you're trying to figure this out, you can consult those as a starting point. The second is there is collaboration. So to some degree, the board is what all the board members are willing to agree that it is. And then third, there is an element of leadership. If you have a particularly strong view of what you think is right for the board, I think it's part of your responsibility to test it out and advocate with other people, rather than just waiting for somebody to give you further instructions. So
Allison, Michael talked about, and we understand that boards have a fiduciary responsibility. That's an essential piece. I've read where people look at fiduciary responsibility as being, look at fundraising and fund development as being linked to the fiduciary responsibility of boards, because you're not just looking at what money has come in, you're looking at what is needed in an organization to build the programs and to support the work. I want to go back, so with that in mind, I want to go back to what you talked about with fundraising plans. So what's the connection between the fundraising plan and the budgeting process in an organization? How do those two dovetail? Because I think they really do.
Yes, obviously. In order to budget, you need to know what your income is going to be, and that's going to depend, in most nonprofits, on fundraising. In the case of the Pearl, we have earned income from ticket sales and we have contributed income. But what you are going to be able to spend obviously depends on what you're going to be able to raise.
So give me an example of how the budgeting process and the fundraising plan for the year, how does that become operational? Who provides the leadership there? How do the staff and the board work together?
Again, it's a collaboration between the treasurer, which is a board position, and the finance committee, which is providing financial oversight, and the managing director, who is the business manager of the Pearl, in coming up with the budget. One of the things that we have worked very hard on over the past couple of years is to be a lot more realistic in our budgeting. My sense, I've been on a number of nonprofit boards, and I think there's a wonderful optimism in the nonprofit world that if you plan and budget, somehow the money will be there. And that's not always the case, and I think in this fundraising environment, this economic environment, it's even harder. So again, it's a collaboration, but the board can also be the voice of reality in terms of, is this budget, this $2 million budget, really realistic given our income prospects?
So Michael, so let's take a situation where a board is a mixture of people who give, every board member contributes from their own personal funds, but some board members do fundraising and some don't. So in your view, given that different organizations do it differently, what's your view about that? Are there alternatives that board members can be provided with so that a board member that says, I can't fundraise, I can't ask anybody for money,
Yeah.
that there are alternatives that are available, including but not limited to being a part of working and developing a fundraising plan?
Well, I would answer that question indirectly. So if I were presented a situation where you have a bit of variation in terms of how much people are giving, what they say about their skills, how much they seem to be committed, I would see that as a starting point. So if somebody says, I don't have anybody to call, I don't feel comfortable doing this, for me that's a point to investigate further and try to figure out, well, what do you mean when you say you don't know anybody? And what seems difficult to you about this? And who do you know who does this effectively? Professionally, I work in the coaching and leadership development space, and that is basically an inquiry-based method of helping people define goals and grow. So we're always just starting with what they first say as a beginning. And I would really investigate what seem to be the barriers. It might be that people don't have the means or the network. It also might mean that they have a misunderstanding of what development can mean. For example, somebody might think that it means calling up their friends and hitting them up for major donations on the spot. That's one method, but there are other methods that are easier. It could be providing names for an annual appeal. It could be inviting people to an event that somehow reflects what the organization does. It might be a theater event, it might be a visit to one of the high schools that we support. Those are all development functions. So it's, I think, getting to know the board members a bit better and what their obstacles are, and working on those to see how much more effective they might be.
So let's go back to the scenario that I laid out about the Alphabet Bates organization. So what does this development director do? What is the new development director who comes into this organization where a good many members of the board are not involved in fundraising? What does he do to facilitate this kind of conversation? Does he facilitate it? Does the chair of the board facilitate it? Just give us a short kind of way of approaching it.
It could be either way. It could be a facilitated discussion in a board meeting. It could also be a series of individual conversations where the person is just getting to know the board members and inquiring a bit more about how they think about development, what their plans are. I think it would probably be stronger if the development director is able to collaborate with at least one board member, so that it's a bit of a team effort. There's no downside to that, and I think it would make the development director feel less on the spot.
So is there training that a development director can engage in with the board individually or as a board to help not only board members develop skills, but also look at the alternative ways that board members can really contribute to fund development?
Sure. If you just do an online search for fundraising training for nonprofits, I'm sure you'd come up with a number of organizations. There might be a half-hour to hour presentation by somebody that's just giving them the lay of the land, how fundraising really works. There might be more individualized training, a type of ongoing coaching. I think there are probably a variety of mechanisms. But I think as far as the other question, other ways to get engaged, that's where I would favor having individual conversations. So I would ask them, what got you interested in this organization? What do you think your best skills are? What's really interesting to you? Where do you rate your current skill in fundraising? How could we support you? So a real range of questions that go toward the larger goal of engagement and uncovering what the different talents are, rather than just assuming you know what they are.
Allison, your thoughts about that?
Most of the training that I've seen is really aimed at teaching people how to ask for money, and I think it's of limited help. I think it's much more fruitful to do what Michael is saying, which sit down on a one-on-one basis with board members and help them think about how they can help the organization with fundraising. And there's their personal financial commitment, which should have been clear coming on board. They may have contacts they may not be comfortable asking, but if you help them think about who do you know, both individuals or in the corporate world or the foundation world, they may have very useful contacts that they can make and facilitate, or in government for the organization. They may help with fundraisers. That might be what their contribution is organizing events. They may help with strategy. They may help with planning and support. But I think it's critical up front when you bring people onto the board to be very clear about what the expectations are, what their role is going to be. I don't think, I think everybody is going to participate in fundraising on a nonprofit board to some extent, but it isn't going to be the principal activity of everybody. There may be people who were brought on because they're attorneys and you need that skill, because they are financial people and you need that skill. They're marketing and PR people. But you need to be very clear about expectations up front.
Can I add on to one thing you said regarding how you make clear the expectations for how much board members are going to give? I think because all nonprofits have a mission and most are filled with very kind-hearted people, that they feel very uncomfortable putting people in situations where they feel the other person might be uncomfortable, and as a result they hesitate to be clear about what their asks are, or they immediately start negotiating away, or they have a value.
That's true.
Or they confuse
That's true.
they confuse their desire to help, for example, lower income people, with a desire not to make relatively affluent board members uncomfortable. And so this is something that your character, the development director, or board members can practice with each other, just being able to state what the expectation is and then saying, opening it up. So for example, pulling a number out of my hat, you may be meeting with new potential board members, you talk about what the responsibilities are, and then you say, and our usual expected ask for board members is $10,000 a year. How do you feel about that? Rather than, we try to get $10,000 a year, but we understand people have a lot of different reasons for getting on boards, and just think about it, and if that doesn't work, just get back to me. So just say it, and then just shut up.
And stick to it.
And stick to it. So much about fundraising is trying to get past the elephant in the room, trying to, it seems to me, not only be really direct with a new board member coming on, but also in the discussions with the board about fundraising and fund development, to really talk about what the issues are, what people experience, and get past that. Just get past that. But you can't get past it unless you talk about it. One other thing I wanted to make sure that we talk about is we have been going through tremendous financial crises over the last several years, and it's had a great impact on the nonprofit world. Could you both briefly address that for us? Tell us what kind of impact you've experienced, maybe either in your own organization or in organizations that you know about, and how that has affected the way the organizations have been working, operating.
I'll just start out by saying that board fundraising has actually become more important because individual giving in the long run has the greatest type of flexibility. In some organizations it may be a large part of the budget, in others it might be very small, but that typically will be unrestricted giving. And while it takes a lot of effort over the years to bring in individuals who will give large amounts over time, once they get in the habit of that, it's a really strong asset. So the fluctuations in the economy have only redoubled the pressure to build up a strong individual donor base.
Right. Allison?
I would agree with that. It's a very tough fundraising environment right now, especially for arts organizations. People tend to, in an economic downturn, they think about feeding people first, which is understandable. They don't think about food for the soul, which is what the arts are. And one of the things that's happened in New York is that in the past, financial services institutions have been major supporters of nonprofits, especially the arts. And as they're struggling, that's really had an impact on corporate giving in Manhattan. And it also affects individual giving because people aren't compensated the way that they were in the past.
Right.
So it means that we have to diversify our sources of funds, and I would agree individuals are particularly valuable because there's more flexibility in how you use the funds that they give.
And so I think that kind of supports this idea that It's not simply fundraising that we're talking about, it's really fund development. It's a recognition that you need to develop relationships and that this is not a short, kind of shoot from the hip ask all the time.
Well,
That's the problem with not planning and not having a strategy. And often with nonprofits, the executive director, going back to your survey, may just sit with the board and say, well, we need you to raise money. Go raise money. And they will, but not in the way that you would like in terms of cultivating long-term relationships with the right organizations and people that are going to be sustainable funding.
Right. Michael?
I was going to add that fundraising is relationship building, and that makes it both a little bit more complicated but also easier. And so for any organization, the more long-term established, meaningful relationships it has with people, with organizations, the better off it will be in the long run.
So if you can each give me and our viewing audience 2 things that the board can do to help an organization kind of establish conditions for fundraising success, what would be the 2 things that you would say would be most critical? Allison?
To ensure that the organization has a strategy and a plan and has thoughtfully targeted where their sources of funding are going to come from, and to follow through on that plan, stick with it. And the second would be, as part of that relationship building, cultivating sources of funding that are going to be with you over a period of time and are sustainable.
Michael?
Number 1, take time to have conversations with individual board members to get to know them. And second, come up with some specific numerical goals for what you're trying to accomplish. It may be as simple as 10 new names.
That's great. So let me thank my guests, Allison Kellogg, who is the board chair of the Pearl Theater Company, and Michael Melcher, who is the board member of Comprehensive Development, for bringing their expertise and insight into the challenges faced by an organization as it tries to develop a culture of fundraising. The report I refer to in the program, Underdeveloped, can be accessed at our website. Next month, we'll discuss the challenges of program evaluation and ways program staff can meet those challenges. Watch the MNN calendar for upcoming dates for nonprofit challenges. I'm Alice Yeager, your host for this series. I look forward to hearing from you and having you and your colleagues join us next month on Nonprofit Challenges.